Hey, come on in. Let's go talk about pocket knives. Today's project was sent in by Kirk from Ty, Texas. This is a 1976 case knife. He said it was the first case knife he ever purchased. Beautiful little two blade here, and the snap is gone in this main blade, just worn out. The other blade is good, but he sent me some history on this. Not only was this the first one he ever had, but it's been repaired before. The snap had worn out on the main blade before, and I think he had broken the pen blade, and somebody replaced both blades, but he kept his original main blade all these years. Now, when he wanted me to repair it, he sent me a parts knife. So we've got a lot to work with here today. But I believe what I can do is that I can move the hole on this original main blade. And this one, it has a lot of history. It's got a little burn mark on the back, and it's worn down a little bit, but it still has a lot of life left in it. And the fact that he kept this originally all those years ago, I think it means a lot to him. So we're going to see if we can't restore that, put it back in his knife, and get that working properly again, and probably just, repair this parts knife that he sent, because it is in good condition and it'll make a wonderful knife. And I don't know that I can do that, but we're going to try to see if we can really give him his money's worth on this one, and get this one back as original as possible and still retain a parts knife for him. But we'll dive into it and see how it turns out. Thanks for joining me on this knife journey. I've decided to use a razor blade to cut the pins on this knife. I've broken bone handles before when using this method, but then I've broken bone handles just about every way that you can think of. There is always a risk of damaging any knife whenever you take it apart. Thankfully, this one comes apart without any more harm, though. I'm leaving the pin on the back end of the knife and only removing the pivot and center pins. I remove those cut pins as I disassemble the knife so that I don't have to flex the handles as much during disassembly. I do find a small amount of wear on the spring for the main blade, but it's in surprisingly good shape, especially considering that it's had two blades that have worn themselves out against it. I'm taking measurements and comparing the two worn blades. Each of them have a bit of the halo effect where an edge of the tang sat off the spring and didn't wear as much as the rest of it. I'm comparing these two blades to get an idea of the original dimensions of the tang. Now, I could get a much better measurement if I remove the good blade from the parts knife, but I'm hoping that I don't need to disassemble it. I will also need to know the correct size of hole to drill. I recently purchased a numbered drill bit set. Now, before this, I've relied on standard American fractional drill bits with a few metric bits that I've accumulated, but I've had situations where none of them were exactly the right size. So I'll keep trying different drill bits from this set until I discover that this one takes a number 42 drill bit. Now I will pin a nail into the pivot hole on this knife and drill a new hole. Now, if you're wondering why I've sped up the video so much, it's because many of you have seen me do this before, and unfortunately, you'll see me do it again on this very blade. I do take careful measurements with my digital calipers, double checking them, and I get the spot marked and centered punched in the correct place. And though I get the drill started on that correct spot, the bit drifted over and I wound up with a hole that was very far from where I wanted it to be. So I'll plug this second hole and carefully measure and mark again using the exact same procedure. Now I'm double checking my measurements. Then once I begin drilling on the mark, I stop and verify the placement before I drill much further and find that it's correct. This time I made up a small board with pins in it to hold that blade still while I drill. These blades have a tendency to spin like a helicopter rotor if the drill bit ever sticks, and that's not really healthy for my fingers. So the board holds it in place, and while my placement for this hole is good, there's only a little quarter moon sliver piece of that second plug remaining in the knife, and it fell out once I finished. So I plugged the hole again, this time using brass rod and soldering it into place. Now at first I was concerned about the durability of brass, but then I recalled that the pivot pin is silvered nickel, which is basically just white brass. It's about the same density metal. And it's rare to see pins that show very much wear, so I believe that this plug should last just as well and last a lifetime. I clamped the blade against my anvil while soldering, not just to hold it in place, but to act as a heat sink to protect the steel of the blade from getting too hot and ruining the temper. Now I lost some of the footage of me drilling that third hole, but it went well. The drill bit stayed in place in the softer brass, and I got it in the same spot as I did the second time. This time, however, the solder held that little small sliver of metal that was covering up the incorrect hole, held it in place, and everything seemed to work fine. Now I am removing metal from the shoulder of the blade so that the blade will sit straight in the frame when opened. I'll file for a minute, do a test fit on the blade, then file some more, repeating this process several times until I get it right. Having the parts knife really helps, as I can see from it that when both blades are fully open, the main blade should sit a little further back than the pin blade. So I keep working on it and testing it off and being careful not to remove too much metal. Now I'm ready to assemble the knife. I perform one more test just to see if I can catch any flaws before I pin the knife together, and everything checks out. I try to drive the pins through so that I only have to cut one end and can save the leftover pin material to use on another knife. But with most of these knives, I'm using pins that were originally thicker, and I've turned them down on the sander to the correct size. That's not a perfect solution, and occasionally the pins are a little thicker in one spot than in another. And when the pins appear to be stuck and will not move any further, it's cheaper to just cut it and waste pin stock than to keep hammering on it and risk damaging this knife. Somewhere I've misplaced my 7/1000 inch feeler gauge, so I'm using the 8/1000 instead. It's close enough, although I do have to tighten the pin just a few taps after pinning it with this slackener. Now it's time to smooth those pivot pins into the bolsters. I'll start with a worn 180 grit belt, then move up to the 400 grit. It doesn't take much sanding, and this knife is ready to polish and return to its owner. But if you'll remember, Kirk set a parts knife for me to use in restoring his, and I didn't need to use it for parts, so let's do a quick repair on it too. If you've watched my other patch videos, you've seen me match color using household spices. This time though, I have a chip of case red bone handle that I'm going to try to sand down and use the dust from that to color my epoxy, and hopefully this will match this original handle color fairly closely. I had one small chunk break off and I have to fish that piece out of my dust. The broken handle piece was a little bit darker than the color in this handle, but my dust seems lighter in color, so I'm hoping that I can meet in the middle and make this one work. I'll use a piece of painter's tape to create a form to keep that liquid epoxy from running down all over the knife. I'll work the air bubbles out of the epoxy first so that I can get equal amounts onto the paper for my use. I'll mix the two parts of the epoxy thoroughly before adding the powder. I'm not really sure how much of the powder to add, so I'll start with just a little bit and continue adding as I try to match the color. Eventually, I just mix it all into the epoxy. It looks brighter on the paper, but darker on the knife. I go ahead and add all of the epoxy that I have to the knife, mounting up my patch above the level of the bolster and the surrounding bone. I can always sand it down to match the others, but you really can't add any more on top of this. Now that my epoxy is cured for a few days, I can remove the tape and begin sanding this patch down. I'll give you a good view of what the patch looks like before I work on it. I start with a 180 grit belt. Epoxy is softer than bone and sands down easier, so I'm being careful not to remove too much. So careful, in fact, that I'm going a little too slowly in this part of the job, so I'll speed up the video for you in just a moment. The biggest challenge is really constantly wiping off the sanding dust so I can get a better idea of my progress. It does tend to hide what you're trying to see. Now to match the jigging pattern. You can see on the back side of this handle that 70s era case bone jigging has these little divots all in lines, but the lines are not straight. They meander across the handle scale. So I will draw lines with a pencil across the front of the knife, starting from those existing divots. I'll use a small ball burr in my Dremel tool on medium speed. I'll first clean up an existing divot that's worn down a bit just to get a feel for how long and how deep to make the rest of them. If you notice, they're not completely uniform, so doing this by hand works perfectly. It was a surprise when I hit that epoxy, as it is significantly softer than the bone. You barely brush the tool up against it and it's done. This is the first time I've tried to match case jigging, and I think it turned out pretty good. This epoxy patch polishes up more slowly than bone. I polish the patch, then the rest of the knife, then come back and polish that patch some more. Matching the color and the jigging pattern really don't matter much if the patch has a dull or matte finish. It needs to shine just as much as the bone to keep it from standing out, so I work on it for a while. I was so excited to get these knives back to their owners that I forgot to record a final analysis video before shipment, but I did take a few still pictures, so we'll just look at those. The original main blade is back in Kirk's knife, and it works great. The walk feels a little bit gritty to me, but if Kirk will oil it and keep using it, that should smooth out in just a short while. This patch probably would have matched the other end of this knife perfectly, but the bone was a little lighter in color here on this end, so it stands out more than I'd hoped. Still, I think it looks pretty good. And plus, I did get a little carried away with the jigging, and it has more pattern there than it does on the rest of the knife. I did leave one other glaring mistake that I didn't even notice until I was editing these videos. Do you see what it is? Watch for it in the next couple of frames. I believe these two knives turned out great, and I'm mostly happy with the results, mistakes and all. And if you haven't caught that other big mistake yet, look at the top knife, the one with the patch on it. It does not have a handle pin on the left side. The pin must have fallen out when the handle originally broke, and for some reason I didn't notice that it was missing until the knife was already on its way back to Kirk. Thank you all for joining me on this knife repair journey. May God bless you all. Goodbye.